Welcome, everybody, to another edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I'm your host, Art Stapleton, and we just finished up a little while ago here in East Rutherford, shadow of MetLife Stadium, at the Giants training facility. The first padded practice of the 2025 training camp. The heat here, if you're in North Jersey and really across the country for the most part, was really unrelenting today. So the Giants did what they could, but tempers flared a little bit. We'll get to that in a second. But some good things to take from the Giants the last 2 days after returning from Saturday's off day. So we'll get into that and talk a little Malik Neighbors, but mostly Jackson Dart, Cam Scattaboo, little Brian Burns, some Abdul Carter, talk about what we had the last 2 days and what we've seen from the Giants. So that's where we're at. This is a great setup for us in the parking lot outside the Giants training facility. This is where we usually put the overflow media, or not we, but the Giants do. And it's a nice little trailer with some AC, and they let us come in here, so this is becoming our summer studio for the All In podcast. So much appreciated to the Giants for letting us duck in here once all the photographers clear out. So let's get down to business. Let's talk about, what everybody wants to talk about. And we can start with Jackson Dart. Wrote a column yesterday off of practice. And I think what we've seen from Jackson Dart last week to this week, and it's only been 5 practices, but the reality is that things are starting to slow down for him, that he was really a half second behind everything starting camp. He'd make some nice throws, but he'd be under pressure. There would be situations where he didn't get the ball off as quickly as he should have. Maybe he wasn't reading the defense the way he would have liked and Brian Daboll would have liked. But that just comes with experience, and the more things he sees, the more at ease he becomes the next time. And Dart said yesterday after practice, the idea of after that first day when he threw the pick 6 to Nick Jones, who's had a good camp so far, really kind of pushing for a potential roster spot if they open up that cornerbacks beyond, the usual suspects. But Dart said when they got in the locker room after that practice, he went to Jones and said, "What did you see? What did I miss? What can you tell me to kind of help me learn from that play?" Now, I think ultimately the reality is that Jackson Dart underestimated the closing speed in the NFL, and it didn't necessarily have to do with Nick Jones. It could have been any player. That closing speed, that window closes very quickly, and he thought he can fit it in there to the tight end, and Jones just robbed him underneath and went the distance for a pick 6. So I think you compare what we saw from Jackson Dart early to, let's go to last Friday, and they closed practice with, they like to close practice, and if you've been around high school or college practices or been even here at Giants practices and training camp, they close it with what they call a move the ball period. I call it down and distance. They usually, move the chains. They'll give a scenario, a game scenario, and say, this is the score. This is how much time is left on the clock. This is what we need to do. We need to move the ball from, the ball's at the 38-yard line, and you've got to go down and either score or you've got to either, kick a field goal. We saw that in a session, I guess it was Friday, where they basically got to a point and then the quarterback spiking the ball. Well, if you look on the clock, there were 3 seconds left of a tie game. They're obviously not going to push the issue. They're going to settle for a field goal. Now, they didn't trot out the field goal unit. Later in training camp, they probably will do that, but they didn't do that. So let's go to Friday, and Jameis Winston was the quarterback for the second team on Friday for the move the ball period, and really did a good job of driving the team down to a certain point. I think they were about at the inside the red zone, maybe about the 15 or so, and Brian Daboll called an audible that only he knew was coming. that includes the quarterbacks, any of the players on the field, or the coaching staff. And he sent Jackson Dart into the practice. So Jackson Dart wasn't prepared for that moment. It's not like he had it scripted. So he had to go in. Basically, they would call the plays, and then he would have to execute. And Jackson Dart went in and ended up throwing a touchdown pass to Cam Scadaboo to end practice. And afterward, it's funny. You talk about, I wonder what Jameis Winston was thinking. He leads the team all the way down, and then Jackson Dart comes in. Well, it was kind of funny when Jameis Winston was asked that yesterday, what he thought. And he said, I'm used to it. When I was in New Orleans, I drive the field, and then Taysom Hill would come off the sideline and basically take my touchdown away, run power, quarterback power, and score a touchdown. So I thought that was kind of funny. So that was Friday. So when we talked to Brian Dable on Sunday morning, Brian Dable talked about, how it's all about surprise. Part of the plan are these built-in surprises. You want to see how they react. That goes for every player, but especially for a young quarterback like Jackson Dart, who you want to see how much he's taking in, how much he's observing, how much he's learning from day to day, really from play to play. So fast forward to Sunday, the Giants were out there. Jackson Dart was essentially running the second team. We get late in the practice for a move the ball period, and Jackson Dart is running the team, length of the field. And, you couldn't have scripted it any better. I mean, it was as if Hollywood was involved. It starts raining at the end of the practice, so you got big raindrop, those Jersey raindrops when it was humid all day, and just here comes the rain. Now, it wasn't pelting people, but you could see the raindrops, even in the videos that I ended up taking. So Jackson Dart drives the Giants on a 12-play drive, and this was mostly second-team guys and undrafted rookies. He had Bo Collins out there, Jordan Bly, just to name a couple. And Cam Scadaboo was out there. So they're driving, and he's hitting guys. He makes a completion to Collins, completion to Bly, a couple dump-offs, a couple checkdowns that we find out today when I asked Brian Dable about it, is that those were proper checkdowns that Jackson Dart should have taken. They weren't scripted plays. He took the checkdowns when they were there and kept the drive moving. So overall, 12 plays. They get inside the 10, and a couple runs. Maybe Dart gets in during the regular season, but they're not going to give him those touchdowns. And then Dart has a pass to the back of the end zone. Oh, well, I'm sorry. Before that, it was fourth and goal, and he gets the defense to jump with a hard count. Now, that's not easy for a young quarterback, especially when you have a young offensive line in front of you, or at least an inexperienced offensive line. It's not the first-team guys that are used to hard counts, quarterbacks' cadences. So he got the defense to jump. So they got an extra 5 yards, or at least I think it was half the distance to the goal. Then on fourth down, he fired to the back of the end zone to undrafted rookie Daquan Felton, and was a very good play by Trey Hawkins to knock the ball up in the air. Now, Cam Scadaboo comes down with it in the end zone, makes the catch, completes the catch anyway, but a catch doesn't count because his toe of his right cleat was on the chalk. So that ends the period. They didn't score. Even though the offense celebrated, the defense wins the day. But for Jackson Dart, it was a great way to end the last practice before the pads came on today. So, again, Russell Wilson is the starter, and I think the Giants have done a good job by not filling anybody with any delusions about Jackson Dart starting. Now, why does that matter? Look, you hear Malik talk, and he met with Kay Adams today. You can check out his interview there. From what he talked to us on the first day of camp, he had the interview with Bleacher Report last week that, he had some interesting nuggets about Russell Wilson. You could see that Malik is building not only a rapport with Jackson Dart, but he's got that rapport with Russell Wilson. And I think what's lost here is that this team respects Russell Wilson. Now, Russell Wilson is not the future quarterback of the Giants. We know that. He's 36 years old. We're going to find out how much he has left. So far, so good. But Jackson Dart knows his role, and I think he's gotten the most out of this role right now. Whether it's second team, third team, we're going to see where he is on game days, whether he's the emergency quarterback or he's the backup that goes in. To me, and I've said this before, I think you're facing this scenario. Russell Wilson starts the season. You see how it goes. If somehow there's an injury and Russell Wilson has to come out and it's a short-term injury, then I think if all things are equal, then Jackson Dart goes in. But if Jackson Dart is still a little bit behind, still learning, then Jameis Winston goes in for the short term. I think if it's a long-term injury, then you make the decision, okay, if the season's sunk, then you play Jackson Dart. But this team right now views Russell Wilson as its starter. And when I say team, I mean the locker room. These players, as much as they love Jackson Dart and believe that he can be a special player, and they do, from the guys I've talked to, they believe Jackson can be a special player. They believe in Russ right now. They believe in what Russ is selling. So until Russ shows them that he's not what they think he is going to be the starting quarterback here. And that's where we are at with the quarterback situation. Now, Tommy DeVito, I give him credit. He's been here. He's made good throws. Tommy DeVito on limited reps here has really shown that, there's something there for him to have a future. I don't mean as QB1. I don't even know if it's QB2. But Tommy DeVito is not here airmailing passes everywhere. He's made some good throws. And it's just a matter of reps and where he's at the end of the summer, where the Giants are at, who's healthy, who's not, and then they have to make a decision. So until then, they're going to keep four quarterbacks. And, that's the way it's going to progress. Let's see. Let's go to my notes. I have my notes and say, I guess we'll go to today, and got a chance to talk to Cam Scatterbill on after practice, and it was really fun. It was the first time I've talked to Scatterbill in person, and the first thing he says to me was, "Yeah, I was looking at your Twitter account yesterday. I was like, making to see what you're writing about, what's going on." So he's obviously a guy who is engaged and wants to talk the game. But I think he also wants to focus on the game. And I wrote about that in a column that posted on NorthJersey.com today. And the thing about Scatterbill is I asked him about the shoulder pads, getting to be in pads, and he laughed. He said, for 3 months, the shoulder pads have been teasing me. They've been sitting in my locker, and I haven't been able to touch them. He's like, and then today, for the first time, I knew when I walked in and I saw my locker, my jersey was already on the shoulder pads, and I was like, all right, it's time to go now. So Scatterbill is who he is as far as a running back when he's got the ball in his hands. It'll be interesting to see once he gets into game action how much punishment he can take. I think there is an underappreciation for the part of his game that he doesn't take the kind of punishment physically that you might think he does. For all the talk about bowling over defenders and I think he knows how to absorb contact, and I think that's a good thing. He's been an excellent receiver so far in camp. Hasn't dropped the pass, and he was very quick to remind me of that he hasn't dropped the pass yet in camp. So I think there's something there with Scatterbill, and Tyrone Tracy has come back looking like the clear RB1 here. He looks more confident, looks fluid. So I expect big things from Tyrone Tracy. So maybe you get that compliment that the Giants so desperately wanted with those two. And then Devin Singletary will be the third guy, and he's the insurance policy. They trust Singletary. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. So that's Scatterbill. Got a question from Eric in K-12, the K-12 tailgate. If you follow this show, we love the K-12 tailgate. Producer Paul Wood is a part of it. Eric said, yeah, today the Giants re-signed Gunnar Olszewski. He wanted to know, does he have a chance to win the punt return job back or no competition? It's going to be Amir Smith-Marset. Well, a couple things. One, Olszewski is back because Bryce Ford Wheaton unfortunately tore his Achilles in practice yesterday. Now, Ford Wheaton is not a returner, but Ford Wheaton is one of their better gunners. And the fact that he's out, I think the Giants wanted to bring in another wide receiver, and I think Olszewski gives some competition, yes, for Smith-Marset, but injuries happen too, and you want to cover yourself the best you can. So I think that's why Olszewski's here. Also, you're not bringing in a receiver that has to learn the system. Wan'Dale Robinson was banged up again yesterday, took a knee to the thigh. He did not practice today. Dable says he doesn't believe it's a serious or a long-term injury. I would think Wan'Dale starts working back into individual drills either tomorrow or later this week. But now all of a sudden you realize if Wan'Dale is out, who's running in the slot? Well, Dalen Cambry, the undrafted rookie who had 10 catches in his career at Louisiana, who is a special teams ace, was with the first team today running some slot. So Olszewski can play the slot as well, and you want those guys in practice. You're not thinking about week one right now. You're thinking about how do we get through the next week or two, and then you see where the roster stands. So I think that's why Olszewski's here. Can he win the punt return job? Well, look, he was the punt returner, and he was good here. So we'll see. If he makes the roster and is that sixth wide receiver, then you have to have a role for him. You don't want him standing on the sideline. So, have Olszewski be the punt returner, have Smith-Marset be the kickoff returner. We'll see. We'll see if that plays out. But it's a good question, Eric, the way things happen. I think another undrafted guy is Bo Collins, who's gotten some attention. He's also shown some on special teams. Now with Ford Wheaton out, a guy they liked at gunner last year was Art Green. He's a corner on the bubble to make this roster. So does Ford Wheaton's injury give Art Green an opportunity? Now, Green made a great interception of Jameis Winston today on a deep throw. I believe it was to Jordan Bly. I have video of it, so I'll have that up on all of my social platforms. And now's as good a time as any to mention I have joined TikTok as well. Yes. So we've got Twitter X, Instagram, and TikTok. It's Art_Stapleton on Twitter and Instagram. And on TikTok, it's just Art Stapleton, no underscore. I'll be putting a lot of content on TikTok as well, trying to reach different audiences. I believe we will have a Twitter X account for the All In with Art Stapleton podcast. I'm working on that. So Paul Wood and I will try to pump out as much content as we can onto socials from the podcast, see if we can get some video clips out there. And once we start having guests, we'll get those out as well. So that's where we're at for this practice. I wanted to share a story, and I'm going to write about this, but I'm not sure when I'm writing about it, but I wanted to bring it to the All-In audience. I wanted you guys to hear it because, I mentioned this on the first podcast of camp, and I told a story about Jameis Winston throwing a pass on air in walkthrough, little Jordan Humphrey dropping it, and Winston just locking in and really demanding better from the receiver, and how that kind of lifts all boats in that situation. People want to talk about trading Jameis. You see what Jameis means to this team if you're watching it. So that was something I noticed. Something else I noticed, and going back to last year's training camp, and never had a chance to fit it into a story or to ask him personally, and then once we got into the season, I didn't have a chance. But I did today, and that's Brian Burns. Brian Burns was on the podium today, was great. Watch that video on Giants.com if you want to see a really cool interview. A guy who's comfortable, a guy who believes that he's on the verge of really having a monster season, and I think Burns is, especially with the presence of Abdul Carter. But I wanted to ask Burns because I noticed when he is not on the field in drills, so when it's the second team or if he's not, case in point on Sunday, because of that collision he had with Wan'Dale Robinson in camp last week, he only did individual drills on Sunday. So as we're standing on the sideline, I see Brian Burns kind of change his vantage point from the sideline to kind of moving back where you normally see offensive coaches stand, and maybe a player or two that's going to shift or get into the next play, they'll stand behind the ball, behind the play. But that's where Brian Burns watches a lot of team stuff. So I asked him today, I said, look, is this just something that I've noticed that you just like that vantage point, or is there a purpose to it? And he actually told me, he said, I can't believe you're the first person who noticed that. He said, because I've been doing it since the second year I was in Carolina. He said, and the reason I do it is he wants the global view. He wants to be able to see both ends. He wants to see the interior. He wants to see how the safeties are coming up and playing. He wants to see how the corners are fitting, how the middle linebackers are. But also he wants to see the offense a little bit and see how things are coming together. And he said he felt as though it's been his responsibility since his second year in Carolina that he needs to be a leader and needs to be a little bit of a coach too. Now, he's looking for himself. Does he pick something up that he might be able to use down the line to benefit his own game, to benefit the first team? But also when he's watching the first team, are there things that he sees that he might be able to help the offensive players? And he said he's talked to Russ about some things, Russell Wilson. He said he would go up to the quarterbacks and say something if he sees something from a defensive perspective to tell them. And he said he's also gone to the offensive coaches and said, hey, look, I see this in practice. This guy's doing this. Have you thought about doing this? That kind of thing. So tip of the cap to Brian Burns. I know he's a maniac and a psycho out on the field in training camp. Never stops. I tweeted this. I've written about this and will continue to write about it. I know Brian Burns didn't come here and get 15 sacks last year, but if you look at his pass rush win rate, it's top 5 in the league. That Burns trade was very good last year. And I know you make that trade, you still only win 3 games. What's the difference? But you've got a cornerstone player here who played injured last year and was still analytically among the leaders in the league. Now, does he have to take that next step in order to reach that high level of pass rushers? Absolutely. But I think maybe we undervalue Brian Burns and his presence here with the Giants. And I think with Abdul Carter and with Kayvon Thibodeau coming back this year, and seems like he's ready to roll and show more than he has as far as consistency goes, I think Burns is the guy you want to watch and say he's really pulling everything together. So he's a guy who wasn't afraid to step up and lead last year. I think that's a good thing. And like I said, for Burns to look at me and say, yeah, nobody really asked me about that, but it's something I've done since my second year in Carolina. I felt pretty good about noticing it and asking him about it, and I thought his answer was very interesting. I think it says a lot about Brian Burns and who he is as a player and as a Giant and what he wants to be here. And I'll end today's show with this from Burns about Abdul Carter. So much was made about Abdul's spin move the other day against Jermaine Illuminor and forced Russ out of the pocket, and he ended up having to go. Maybe he has a sack in the regular season. And the spin move was gorgeous. I put his spin move earlier in camp, a video of it on my Twitter account, so you can check that out. But what Burns said about Abdul is what he liked the most about that spin was that he set it up. He said he and Jermaine Illuminor had a battle, play to play to play, and Carter set it up like a boxer. He set Illuminor up for that spin move with moves that he made 2, 3, 4 plays earlier in that session. So says a lot for a veteran like Burns to see that in a 21-year-old rookie in Carter and say, you know what, that's the reason why that guy's going to be special. And I think that says a lot about Carter. It says a lot about Burns. And that's why this defense feels different this year with all the pieces that they've added on the back end, with Adebo and Holland, with the maturation of Newbin and Phillips, with the competition with Tay Banks and Cordell Flott opposite Adebo, and then obviously all the pieces up front. I think this defense feels good about itself because they know what they have. They see Abdul Carter. And right now, Dexter Lawrence is a generational player, and he's the best player at the position that he plays in the NFL. Nobody has done what Dexter Lawrence does as nose guard in this league right now. I really do think by watching Abdul Carter and what he's done, he's got a chance in a year, 2 years, that we're talking about Abdul Carter among the elite pass rushers in the league. And that's how good he's looked. And my friend Carl Banks, obviously two-time Super Bowl champ, Ring of Honor here, should be in Canton, made the point on his podcast with Bob Papa that if you watch Carter, he just looks differently. And that's what I've been saying since minicamp, since rookie minicamp. He looks different. He's just out there moving differently. And everything he's doing is instinctive. He's not going off the playbook, but some of the things he's doing, you can't teach. And for Carl Banks to mention Lawrence Taylor and not compare, and he was quick to say, I'm not comparing Carter to Taylor. He said, but Taylor was the kind of player, best defensive player in the history of the NFL, that he would do something in a game or in practice, and they'd get back either to the meeting room or the locker room, and someone would go up to him and say, hey, Lawrence, how did you do that? How did you pull that off? And LT would be like, what do you mean? Like, I don't know. I'd have to look at it on film. Because it was all instinct. It was God-given. It was LT being LT. And I think so far, again, 1 day in pads, as a pass rusher, you have to like what you see from Abdul Carter because Abdul Carter has that it factor that he's just being Abdul Carter. And what Abdul Carter can become, sky's the limit at this point. And I think when you hear a guy like Carl Banks and you watch with your own eyes here, I think that says a lot for what the Giants were able to do in this draft this year. So a couple of the notes from today's practice just before we wrap up here. And again, appreciate Paul Wood, as always, producing the show. Appreciate the all-in audience. Evan Neal looked pretty good today. Had a nice combo block, playing right guard, sharing the first and second team reps. First team, he went in for Greg Van Roten. That's by design for the Giants. I think it also helps Van Roten to have a veteran not burn himself out in training camp, considering he was just signing with the Giants a year ago at this time, 1 week at the training camp, played every snap of the season. That is Van Roten. Jermaine Illuminor talked after practice about a double team that you can really feel Evan Neal's power on that double team. There was a time, look, everybody's going to rip John Michael Schmitz. There was a screen to Tyrone Tracy, and John Michael Schmitz picked up a pancake, buried Bobby Okereke into the ground today in pads. Now, a big thing with JMS is he's got to be stronger at the point of attack because you're going to see outstanding defensive tackles in this league. And JMS needs to show that he can be sturdy enough at center to kind of withstand that. I think he got surprised a little bit earlier in camp. I know the video kind of went viral of what Abdul Carter did, knocking him completely back. But I think he was probably surprised by not only Abdul Carter being on the inside, but also his power. Because Abdul, when you watch him, you see the speed, you see the agility, the smoothness, but I don't know if you expect him to have the kind of power that he has, and I think he's shown that. I think he showed JMS that. Now, to Okereke's credit, to give him a little bit of a pass, he was off balance on that play, so JMS really took advantage of it. I'm not sure if they were squared up, if you'd be able to power him to the ground. But again, a highlight play for JMS. If we're going to talk about bad snaps in the heat and humidity over the weekend, you might as well talk about a good play for JMS. And he is a big key to this team and what he can become at center. If they don't get JMS to play at a higher level, this entire offense could struggle. I think that pretty much wraps everything for today's show. Keep it right here. We will do what we can to put out another all-in by the end of this week. Paul and I will orchestrate that and figure it out. If not, keep enjoying camp. Oh, there's one more thing I wanted to say. If you're listening to this show, I have camp tickets for tomorrow. I'm not going to put it out on Twitter until later tonight. So if you hear this show and you want those camp tickets, DM me on Twitter. Tell me, hey, Art, I heard you on All In. Can you send me those tickets for Tuesday's camp practice? I will do that. If I don't hear from anybody, I want to give fans a chance to come out here tomorrow. So if I don't hear anybody by, say, like 6 or 7 o'clock tonight, I'll put it out there on Twitter and see if anybody wants the tickets. But if you hear this now on the show, you're hearing it exclusively. I am not going to release it until 6 o'clock. So tell me you heard it on the show. Tell me you want the tickets, and I will ship them over to you. All you need is an email address, and you can be here at Giants training camp tomorrow. Again, for Paul Wood, I'm Art Stapleton. Thanks for being all in. We're all in, as always, and we'll catch you later this week.